Grace and peace, family. My name is Vicky Dillon, and I'm pleased to be a contributor here on African Diaspora News Channel with the Vicky Show. Please make sure you give us a big thumbs up, and share the broadcast. Thank you so very much. Now, family, I want you to listen very closely to this video clip. It is actually a part of a podcast that was released not too long ago that shows how the FBI infiltrated Black Lives Matter. Now, I want you not to become fatigued or forgetful, because folks like myself already were ceding to you all a long time ago some of the suspicious activities of your Black Lives Matter. We told you, when I say we, I'm talking about alternative Black media, independent media, told you that some of the elements of Black Lives Matter look suspect. Did we not? We told you it looks like them folks are involved in some of the formations. Now that evidence has come out, you've got these so-called left-wing political liberal outlets like Democracy Now! And others that are now giving credence to the stuff we said early on. I have to bring this to your attention because I have to let you know how right we keep being, and how we have our pulse on what your U.S. government and the powers that shouldn't be are doing. Are y'all hearing me today? Listen to a brief clip of this podcast that came out about this breaking news.
I didn't know much about him, but he drove a hearse. And inside this hearse was like a lot of guns, you know, like AR-15s and all other kind of shit. I had never held one of those before in my life, and I held it. And I was like, oh, shit. Man, I'm pro-gun and everything, but I never held anything like that. Yeah, it was just this badass dude, you know, talking about he worked in the foreign military. He was for the Black Lives Matter movement. And, you know, it just seemed interesting, you know.
In August 2020, with millions of Americans protesting across the country, activist Zeb Hall invites a guy he's met at one of the demonstrations to his apartment in Denver to talk about plans for the future.
The way I look at it is like, it has to happen, it has to happen. But it's like you said, I mean, how extreme do you expect it? Would you want it to go?
Okay, family, did you hear that? Now, what are you going to say about independent Black media telling you that we know how your government moves? Now they're trying to call this COINTEL 2.0. No, we've been saying the movements of the government are that. I know in my own story, when I went through an unjust federal case, after being a voice in multiple civil cases and through some of my activism and community engagement, I knew the information came out in 30-some thousand documents in my own case. And to this day, I said, until this day, the judge refused to order the government to turn over to me all of the documents that they had. To this day, I don't have it. She protected them, the judge. And some of the sloppily redacted documents that I did receive were internal emails that shows that the federal government was in touch with some of the high-level entities, banking entities and others, begging them, pressing them to come after me because of the everlasting work I was giving them by myself. So I didn't need to go past my own story. I didn't need to know about Dr. King, Minister Malcolm X, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, how they tried to come against our brothers and sisters back in the day that were really trying to make a difference and to move Blacks forward. I didn't even need to know their stories. I knew my own.
You've got the undercover recordings of, for example, the Black activist Zeb speaking to this man, Mickey Windecker, who would travel around in a silver hearse. First, if you can tell us where you got these recordings, if you can, but lay out the story for us.
Sure. I can't talk about sourcing for the recordings or the records, but what I can say is that what's significant about this show is that it's the first behind-the-scenes look at how the FBI infiltrated and investigated racial justice groups and the racial justice movement during the summer of 2020, which for 2 years now has always been an open question, which is how did the FBI respond to the racial justice movement, given the context that the FBI had previously designated black political activists as so-called black identity extremists or anti-government extremists. And what's significant about this is that the FBI in Denver, according to internal FBI recordings or internal FBI reports and undercover recordings, hired a convicted felon with a history of sexual assault and menacing with a weapon to infiltrate these groups while being paid thousands of dollars. And the shades of COINTELPRO that are part of this rise from the fact that Mickey Windecker, the informant, ended up becoming a leader in the protest movement, just as we saw informants in the 1960s and 1970s during COINTELPRO become leaders in those movements, and then accuse other leaders, or the real leaders of these groups, of being informants, a practice called snitch jacketing that was used to devastating effect against black political groups in the 1960s. And that's exactly what happened in Denver. Mickey became a leader of the racial justice movement there, accused real leaders of being informants when they were not, and then once he was in a position of leadership, attempted to entrap local activists in crimes, in some cases violent crimes. In fact, Mickey and the FBI went so far as to try to stitch together a supposed plot to assassinate Colorado's Attorney General, Phil Weiser, which ultimately went nowhere, but shows you the scale that the FBI had in trying to manufacture a plot that activists could get behind that would then reveal these activists as being violent. And I think it's important to understand the context in which this happened. In 2020, the Trump administration at the time was really beating the drum on this idea that Antifa and Black Lives Matter activists were potentially violent. This was a narrative that was being reinforced and echoed by right-wing media at the time. And what you're seeing in these undercover recordings is the FBI essentially trying to make that possible and happen. Ultimately, that does not happen. Obviously, there was no assassination plot or attempt against Phil Weiser, the Colorado Attorney General. But the FBI, using this paid informant, went to extreme lengths to try to make that happen.
Now listen to a little bit more of an excerpt from this Black publication, The Moguldom Nation, what they break down in this piece that they did, which really serves as a companion to the audio podcast piece that you just heard. Their headline says, report, informant got $20,000 from the FBI to create divisiveness among George Floyd protesters, accused activists of working with the police. Listen, the Federal Bureau of Investigation paid a convicted felon to be an FBI informant and undermine racial justice protests during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer of 2020, a new podcast alleges. According to this particular report, it says here, your government paid a convicted felon, knowingly, family. Are y'all hearing me? Your government knowingly and willfully paid a convicted felon $20,000. Are y'all hearing me? They're known as the Alphabet Boys in this 10-episode docuseries that debuted in February that accuses the FBI paying Mickey Windecker tens of thousands of dollars to be a planted informant. Windecker is a felon with a violent sexual assault conviction. The podcast cites among its evidence undercover recordings of the FBI and Windecker and statements from Denver racial justice activists in Denver, including Zebediah's Zeb Hall. Federal law enforcement caused violence and destruction in the summer of 2020, Hall said. The FBI's informant was a criminal who pushed activists towards violence as a part of an attempt by the federal government to undermine our political movement from within. A summation of the podcast by digital news platforms AJ Plus said Windecker received at least $20,000 to serve as a spy and create internal division and mistrust. He reportedly gained the trust of protesters and became a leader in the movement. He also allegedly accused the movement's real leaders of working with authorities and set others up to be arrested. The Alphabet Boys podcast host and investigative journalist Trevor Aronson, is the one who uncovered the alleged activities. He said the FBI used counterterrorism tactics during the operation. The FBI's domestic maneuvers, their strategies and how they deal with foreigners is exactly how they deal with the true founding fathers and mothers of this country, Black Americans. Dear family, we are seeing the manifestation of anti-Black war on so many fronts, it's hard to keep up, which is why I tell you that we need a supernatural force, and we certainly need unity in America, and to the degree that we can have with our Black family in the diaspora around the world. You can be certain we're going to stay on top of this story for any other important information that you need to know. You already have heard about that in Mississippi, they are literally taking steps to reinstitute, not figuratively, I said literally, reinstitute Jim Crow in America. Apartheid. Officially, they're already functionally doing it, yes. This shows you the times that we're in. And that the oppressive class knows, as it's written, as it's prophesied, that their time is up. So they're doing desperate measures. And so for those of you that gave our open enemy the benefit of the doubt and said they would never do this again, you done lost your mind. My name is Vicki Dillard. Be sure to check out my website at VickiPlanet.com. It should be above or below VickiPlanet.com to find out about my yummy products and services. Also, be sure to follow me on my own platform at VickiDillard.tv here on YouTube. I can't wait to see you again.